On July 21st, 1993, Dr. Avraham Biran, an Israeli archaeologist, discovered a remarkable stone bearing an inscription written in ancient Aramaic. He had found the first reference outside the Bible to King David and a ruling dynasty, evidence of the House of David.
Raise up a king, one of your own. Call him to lead us, establish his throne. I have chosen a shepherd after my heart, King of my people, my anointed one.
Shalom, hello again. Welcome back to our House of David series. We're at David's Tower in Jerusalem's Old City. This wonderful succession of walls surrounds the Jaffa Gate of the Old City. And we have looked at David in the previous programs as a shepherd boy, a musician, a warrior, and his gathering of the materials to build the temple. David's wish was to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, but the Lord denied him that. There was blood on his hands, but he did allow his son Solomon to build it and to carry on the Davidic covenant, the promise of an eternal dynasty in the family of David through his son Solomon, and so on. At the dedication of the rebuilt temple, Solomon prays a prayer to that effect, and I look at 2 Chronicles 6:16. Now therefore, O Lord God of Israel, he says, keep with thy servant David my father that which thou hast promised him, saying, there shall not fail thee a man in my sight to sit upon the throne of Israel. He reminds God of what he said there would always be. And a descendant of King David to sit on the throne of Israel. Yet so that thy children take heed to their way to walk in my law, as thou hast walked before me. Now then, O Lord God of Israel, let thy word be verified, which thou hast spoken unto thy servant David. And it has been verified. There was a succession of kings of David's line, and this, of course, leads to the Messiah of David's line, Jesus, through both his mother and father. The genealogies go back to David through Nathan and Solomon. And so the reigning king of Israel, Jesus, is of the same line. Problem. In Solomon's own prayer, it was to walk in the ways of the Lord, but he himself did not do that very well. Solomon's lifestyle is notorious. The people were taxed heavily to maintain the palace. He had pagan wives. This man could marry like no other in history. He had 700 wives. He had 300 concubines on top of that. There was idolatry in the palace. Foreign women convinced Solomon to look into their gods and to do their ways, and it deteriorated into idolatry. There was rebellion and a divided nation after Solomon, and finally, with the succession of evil kings and a couple of good ones, King Josiah, King Hezekiah tried to clear the pagan altars from this land, but there were too many of the other. And finally, Nebuchadnezzar and the families of the north destroyed the temple that Solomon had built. It was in its time the largest temple ever made by human hands, and it was gone. But then Israel bounced back, as it always seems to do. Ezra and Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the temple, a second temple. This was the one that came down to us to the age of King Herod and of Jesus. And it was the one of which Jesus unfortunately had to prophesy in Matthew 24:2. See ye not all these things, there will not be left here one stone upon another, which was not thrown down. And indeed, in the 1st century, in 70 AD, in a siege of Jerusalem, the Romans destroyed that second temple. And that was the last temple of God that we have seen. We're now in an age where people are hoping and praying for the third temple, but the second was destroyed at that time. Archaeologist Danny Bahat enlightens us on that cataclysmic event.
We are standing now near to the southwest eastern end of the Temple Mount, looking at the eastern wall. immediately we can discern easily what we call the seam, which is a kind of a straight joint which divides between, to the right, older masonry, and to the left, Herodian masonry. The Herodian masonry here is so clear, one can see beautifully the courses which were cut by him in a very special manner, what we will call marginal dressing. You can see that every stone is dressed with frame on it. Moreover, at the 7th level, one can see the stones protruding out from the wall, which is actually a springing of an arch, above which 2 gates or 2 openings into the Temple Mount exist. Above it, all what we see on top is Arab of various periods, which is very difficult to discern precisely. In any rate, this must have been one of the most important corners of the Temple Mount in Herod's time. You can see that probably this was a staircase leading down from the Temple Mount to the valley of Kedron or Cedron, which is down below. Let's go to the south and examine what we see in the southern wall.
On a recent program, Danny gave us a tour of an excavation site located at the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount. We saw building stones that were 3,000 years old, dating to the time of Solomon. Danny now takes us closer to the southern wall of Herod's time. Jesus and the disciples ascended these stairs as they approached the temple. It was through this gate, later walled up by the Crusaders, that they entered the temple. These mikvaot, or ritual baths, were used for cleansing before entering. And these very stones, despite their immense size, are just exactly like the ones that Jesus prophesied would fall in Matthew 24. Danny gives us further background on how King Herod built his temple. It all started with a round, natural hill.
Of course, to take a natural rounded hill and turn it into a square was a great undertaking, and undoubtedly the Herodian temple is one of the greatest buildings in antiquity. Herod had, in order to level the Temple Mount, had to cut away mountains which were higher than the Temple Mount, like a hill which was further to the north, and from these leveling works he had a lot of stones. Many of the stones which we see here were actually excavated in the very same place where we are standing now, cut from the rock and brought into masonry. The whole process is very clear to us, and I would like only to add that although the stones which you see here are comparatively small, they weigh not more than 1 ton, we've got some stones which exceed 600 metric tons, which make it some of the largest building stones of the Temple Mount. And this was Herod's work. Herod was able to do it because, economically speaking, the country prospered under his rule. He had copper mines in Cyprus, he had perfumes industry in Jericho, and so from all those kind of things and many more, and a lot of labor which he had, because the Jewish people was quite large people at that time. It numbered over 2 million in this country. All that enabled him really to do all the great projects like building the Temple Mount. It never helped though. The Jews disliked him always because his submission to the Romans was so evident that the works on the Temple Mount were under the mark, if so to say, of the Roman rule, and the Jews wanted God to rule them and not the Romans.
Indeed, archaeological finds from this area prove that the Jews would not submit to Rome. Jewish coins bear no likeness to King Herod or anything having to do with Rome. They show only symbols that suggest the worship of God.
In the Roman period, many of the very essential implements, such as pulleys or cranes, were already known. With pulleys, they were able to reduce the size or the weight of stone from 40 to 1. In other words, to pull the stones on wooden cylinders with those pulleys was much easier than what it seems to us. Although the big stones, really the largest ones which we have, weighing 600 tons, they were really a very heavy work to do. According to Josephus Flavius, Herod took for the work 10,000 workmen. some of which were also priests, because he was afraid that he might need the priests to do works in places where ordinary people could not step into, and only priests could. The problem was that now we know from the archaeological excavations that Herod died in 4 BCE. When Herod died, works were not finished yet, and so the works of the construction of the Temple Mount were halted. Many people were left unemployed. And I can say that actually, when you read the Gospels, you can see the reality in Jerusalem was that actually many people were very poor. They were very poor because they were left unemployed because of the cessation of the works on the Temple Mount. It was probably such a great project the whole of the Jewish people living in this country was involved in. And one shouldn't overlook the fact that all the Jews in the world sent money for the construction of the temple. It was a unique enterprise, unique undertaking in the history of world architecture. The temple was destroyed in a terrible fire. We see it always, not only from the historical descriptions of Josephus Flavius, but even here you can see the fire which struck the southern wall and really caused the weathering of the stones. The fire was really terrible one, and it's described by everyone who witnessed it.
It is amazing to see stones that were thrown down by Romans 2,000 years ago, and you know that's only halfway back through Israel's history. This is so old a nation, it has a long, long past, and will have a very bright future. We can see that biblically too. And we were able to talk with ex-Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir about the future of Israel after this.
You cannot imagine a Jewish people, a Jewish state, without the Bible as its spiritual constitution.
I've made so many new friends, and I would encourage anyone to go on these tours. And Zola's incredible, his knowledge, his love of Israel.
I'm just overwhelmed by it all. It's tremendous. If anybody's planning to come, this would be the ideal way I would suggest for anybody to come. Sign up with Zola in one of his groups and come.
For a free brochure of Zola's upcoming tours, write or call today.
Israel's future may very well be determined by what happens along its northern borders. This is the Golan Heights on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. From this vantage point, Syrians used to fire their guns upon Israeli fishermen below. I asked former Prime Minister Shamir what he thought about Israel giving up this area once again to Syria.
Well, you know, it would be a nonsense to give up one of the main reasons for Syria not to try to attack Israel. Because as long as the Golan Heights is in our hands, any reasonable Syrian government will not try to attack Israel. And of course, they have already, as you know, a large Israeli community there in the Golan Heights.
Yes.
And why to give it up? Why to dissolve all that?
And Jerusalem.
Well, Jerusalem is not a question, not a question. It's a common, it's a consensus by the Israeli nation that Jerusalem has to be the capital of the state of Israel. Nobody could imagine a state of Israel without Jerusalem as its capital.
Arafat, though.
Arafat,
like
yes.
to have it as
therefore I think it's not a peace. If somebody wants to get your capital and to make of it his capital, you cannot make peace with him.
Well, the way the story goes, I guess he would say, we've always been here, the Jews came lately, Jerusalem was ours.
You know, it's not the truth. The Palestinians have never been here as a nation, not in Israel, not in Jerusalem, They've never had a nation, had an independent state, and Jerusalem was never an Arab capital, never in its history for 3,000 years.
King David actually made it the capital of Israel 3,000 years ago. Our series of programs focuses on that time because it's sort of similar to this time. He was trying to make a peace process with enemies on the borders and in the country and so on. God said in the Bible that there would always be a ruler of King David's house to take care of Israel.
Yes, of course.
Does it seem to you that we're, with peace and everything else, is there a messianic age coming? Are things going to get better?
Well, I believe in it, and I trust that it will become better. And we will have our country here, our state here. And, you know, 2 years ago we have proved that it's possible and that it's feasible. And I don't see any reason why not to renew it and continue with it. And I think we will have our state here. We will have many immigrants. Our population, our Jewish population will grow. And we will have here a state of 10 million or more. And it will be a very prosperous state, a strong state. And it will exist forever.
That's very biblical too.
Well, of course, you know, the Bible is the foundation of our nation, of our national spirit, of our national faith. You cannot imagine a Jewish people, a Jewish state, without the Bible as its spiritual constitution.
Do you feel you're getting support from the other biblical people, the Christian people?
Yes, of course, there is. There is an important support from many Christian communities in the world. Not from official bodies, not from states or what, but from many, many organizations, and we are encouraged by this.
Yes. But Muslim people also claim the Bible, but take a different view where Israel's concerned.
Well, for them the Bible is not important, and the Muslim people, they don't attach any importance to peace, to democracy. And well, on the contrary, for them, as you know, the law of the Quran is that Muhammad has to govern, to dominate the world by sword.
By a sword.
By sword.
Yeah.
And this, until this day, it's accepted by all the Muslim states and countries.
Arafat, as a matter of fact, said used the word jihad in terms of Jerusalem, a holy war to regain Jerusalem.
Of course. Not only Jerusalem. He speaks about Jerusalem, but he has in mind all of Palestine.
All of Israel.
All of Israel.
I hesitate to ask you, but the world is trying to make a statesman of him. You are a real statesman. Well, can he rise to the occasion?
Well, you know, it depends on the attitude of the world. If the assessment, the international assessment, will be that Arafat is a real leader, he will try to be a real leader. But it depends on us, I think. I think that in this part of the world, in this corner of the world, the Jewish people, the Israeli people, has to decide what will happen here, the character, the size of our country, and the character of our life. And we will decide it. It's a matter now of internal difference of views. But I hope and I believe that in the near future, justice will appear. The people will express its view, and we will come back to power. The larger Arab community, that is the nation, Arab nations, have conducted an embargo against Israel for many years. Do you think that things will lighten up? Will they get a bit more friendly when we get past this impasse?
Well, I don't think, but you know, it's not so important. After all, this embargo of the Arab countries didn't play any role in the development of Israel. It's a fact that in spite of all the obstacles that the Arabs put in the way of Israel, Israel advanced all the time, and we can see a miraculous development of the Israeli capacities in the 46 years of our existence as a state, in spite of all the wars, in spite of the Intifada, in spite of the economic boycott and all these obstacles put by the United Nations and so on. Therefore, I think that the Arab opposition is not very important, and I think we will overcome it.
Yeah. Thank you for this interview.
Well, you're welcome.
Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I shall not
Well, Prime Minister Shamir certainly has a clear-eyed view of the situation in Israel, and why not? I don't know. I really agree with what he says. He just doesn't believe in this peace process, and neither do I. The Golan, which he mentioned, you know, this was a terrible area for 20 years. The Syrian gunmen shot down at people around the Sea of Galilee just for fun, up until the '67 war when the Israelis ran them off the mountain. And when we got up there, the Israeli troops found high school boys chained to their machine guns while the Syrian officers had beat a retreat. Sad stories. The mountains of Israel are very important. The kind of fighting that goes on in the Middle East and with Arab mentality, mountains, hillsides, etc., are very important. Their people are expendable. Human wave attacks are a likelihood. And the West Bank is all mountains too, though. The whole peace process is based on handing mountains over to people who are likely to attack from mountains. The mountains are important to the Lord, too. He spoke of them. Ezekiel 36:4, for example. Therefore, ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord God to the mountains and to the hills, to the rivers and to the valleys, to the desolate wastes, and to the cities that are forsaken, which became a prey and derision to the residue of the heathen that are round about. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the heathen. God takes a side in this. You can't hand over pieces of a promised land to an enemy and not incur the wrath of God. And I want to make a point about Syria. Syria is different. It's different than Jordan. It's different than Egypt. It's different even than the PLO. Those are difficult enough to deal with. But Syria is not a real country. Syria is a mindless totalitarian dictatorship, a one-man rule. 17 or 20 million people, who knows, about whom a news story never, ever emerges. No product is manufactured. No trade is done. You can't deal with people. Syria is primitive even by Arab standards, and you cannot deal with people like that. What they say will not hold. What they sign will not be obeyed. You cannot make peace with Syria. I want to say it, and say it so clearly because everyone else is, even President Clinton went there. Can you imagine the President of the United States bowing in the throne rooms of a murderer like that? Downtown Damascus is the site of I don't know how many different terrorist group headquarters. They have obviously been helping at least to finance and organize Iranian money and Libyan terrorists and so on to blow up the World Trade Center, Pan Am 103, and all the rest of it. Do we have no shame? Is there no time we draw a line? Is there no time we say to him, you know what? Like Cedrus, like Castro, we just can't take your company? No, we go bowing and scraping. Imagine, let me say it plainly, there is no chance, not 1%, there's no chance to make peace with Syria, ever, no matter what they promise, no matter what they sign. Northern wars were always a headache. When David consolidated his capital of Jerusalem, he always had to have an army up there in Galilee watching the Golan. And this is where the House of David stone comes from. You know, it was a northern war that was commemorated on a stela from which this stone was taken. And we cut out the words on the stone that say Beit David, House of David. You can plainly read of those who can understand some Hebrew or can look at an Aramaic alphabet. You can put it together. Beit David, plain to see. 800 years before Christ and more, this stone was made, and it is the extra-biblical proof that the House of David really existed. $29, we've made it up in a little lightweight display thing for your home with the scriptures on the back. I think you'll like showing this off. $29 for the House of David stone. And folks, how about the funds? You people are watching on the small station. I am sorry when the program suddenly goes off, but what do you want us to do if you never pay for it? We can't send it to you. So a word to the wise, please, and Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Raise up